my eye. Through the mist, my surprise shone light from distant northern skies. At that point, I realized I don't know where it comes from, but I know it's okay. If this is all an illusion, then I'm willing to play.
Welcome to the Quantum Guide Show, interviews with awakened masters as they share their quantum work with you. The Quantum Guide Show is produced by Karen Holton, creator of the 9 Steps to Quantum Health Transformation, a free 9-step online course to give you the tips and resources you need to thrive. Karen lost and continues to keep off 178 pounds of surplus body weight as she made her dreams come true. Whether you are awakening to the ascension process or simply want a wiser, more efficient lifestyle, this program is for you. No strings attached. The Quantum Guide Show is brought to you in part by Zendome's Orgonite, Karen's unique brand of orgone generators, ethically sourced, handmade, and double charged for maximum effect. Find out how orgone generators work and what they can do for you. Don't be fooled by imitations. Check out Karen's current selection, only available from her website, KarenHoltonHealthCoach.com, and on Facebook, facebook.com/Quantum Health Transformation. Enjoy the show.
Welcome to episode 24 of the Quantum Guide Show. Today we have a brand new guest. Tom is a husband, father, researcher, writer, guitar hack, and experiencer of the paranormal and mystical. His own awakening and inner search for truth became the catalyst for his website, which is called WITHINSIDEOUT, helping the transition that our planet and its people are currently going through by bringing awareness, insight, and light, which is knowledge, out of the darkness from where we are emerging. Tom began his awakening journey in 2012, where he would soon experience several paranormal occurrences that eventually led to some unexplainable sightings. By 2019, he built his website to not only give other newly awakened souls something to identify with, but to also share the information he discovered through the work of many healers, channelers, spiritualists, scientists, ufologists, whistleblowers, and truth seekers. Tom is joining me today to discuss how his own awakening forced him to look back at the past he once tried to forget, until many unexplainable coincidences, aha moments, and nudges of an unseen nature made him realize how his life seemed part of a greater plan for what is now being called the Decade of Awakening. And with this new decade, the internal processes he believes will continue to happen to more and more people moving forward. So Tom wanted to share his story, knowing it will find those it's meant to, while doing what he feels called to do. Welcome, Tom. How are you today?
Hello, Karen. Thank you very much for having me on your show. And yeah, I have a lot to cover, and I'm going to try to, get to the heart of the story. So I do want to say that I feel it's important that how extremely lucky and grateful I am for my life, although I admit there was times I didn't always feel that way. But I guess that's a part of the whole mystery.
Mm-hmm.
So here's a bit of my background. I was the youngest of 3 kids who was very bright and always did well at school. But once trouble in my parents' marriage started becoming evident, both my grades and I suffered. By the time I was in 8th grade, I would go on to have the worst year of school in my life. I was bullied, beat up, and isolated until I eventually didn't have a single friend or ally who would dare be seen talking to me. So you could say I was psychologically broken. By the first day of summer vacation, that's when my father told me he was officially leaving the house. And with my sister about to leave for college and my brother already having left the house, in a short period of time, my family and my social life got turned upside down. So I pretty much had lost all faith in people, and I rebelled. I rebelled against my parents, the school system, and anybody else of authority, while turning to alcohol and then marijuana to ease the anxiety and anguish I constantly seemed to be living with. I would go on to get expelled from my high school, choosing instead to run amok during the day while sneaking out at night against my mother's wishes, until I finally had to appear before a judge in court who put me on probation. From there, I was made to attend a small school several towns away with other expelled students. And we were a motley band of misfits, I assure you. However, when I stopped showing up for that bus to take me to that school, it was finally decided that I be put on a psychiatric hospital ward for what was supposed to be a 3-week evaluation, but what turned into a 4-month stay. On that ward, there were 5 other teenage girls, and the rest were adults. And between all of them, there were many stories and traumatic things I would either learn or have to bear witness to. 3 of the 5 girls had tried to kill themselves, one of which had been systematically cutting a gash into her wrists that was so deep and ghastly. I still wince when I think about it on the day she showed it to me in private. Another girl there had anorexia, and another simply liked to decorate her body with cuts from a razor. Her name I can't remember, but the others were Lisa, Julia, Christine, and Joanna. I would eventually go on to meet a girl from a different ward named PJ, who I grew quite fond of. And over time, she would trust me enough to share her reason for being there. A family member had been molesting her, and out of despair, she tried taking her own life. And like all the other girls in my ward, I grew to care for her, and yet by the time I was discharged, I had to accept the fact that I couldn't be the one to save her. From my time there, it's safe to say the whole experience had a profound effect on me, but at 15 years old, I was too young to understand just how much. So I returned back to the school for the expelled to finish up the school year there, before finally ending up at a boarding school for troubled kids. Once there, I would find a wide variety of characters, many of whom were there as a last resort before a juvenile detention center. After 3 years of living day to day with so many other conflicted and colorful personalities, even though I walked away with a diploma, the real education I felt I received was in observing others, watching, listening, and sensing from all the other troubled souls around me. At the time, I didn't know what an empath was, let alone why I sometimes felt so much in my surroundings. So, with much of my teenage years being spent around people who were dealing with a lot of personal issues, you could say it gave me a deeper view of the human condition. However, I was also left with a somewhat twisted and jaded view of life, one that left me skeptical of what the outside world had to offer. And so, the naive, innocent kid that I once was had turned into a snarky, sarcastic rat bastard with an ornery disposition for anybody who rubbed me the wrong way. There's just no sugarcoating the truth of who I became. My first summer out of school, I ended up getting a job doing on-again, off-again construction work. And except for those close circle of friends I had remade for myself through the years, I usually kept most people at an arm's length. I became more of a quiet, observant guy who often didn't speak unless spoken to. And yet to bring me out of my protective shell, I relied on alcohol, partying heavily with my friends and hanging out in bars, thinking maybe I could find somebody to fall in love with and care for. But instead, I usually found myself with a hangover in the morning. And after a couple of years of that routine, I felt burned out. But after trying to run away from my problems, I only discovered more problems. So at 22 years old, I ended up in a rehab. At 24, I got a job through an old friend at an electronic entertainment company where I worked in a basement with about 10 other people. And not long after I started, I saw this unforgettably beautiful smile enter the upstairs foyer to greet the receptionist. It was a smile I wouldn't easily forget. I had no idea who she was or if she even worked there, but she was smartly dressed and radiated a glow about her that would remain in the back of my mind for days to come. About 2 weeks later, guess who started working down in the department and ended up sitting directly across from me? Yes, indeed, that unforgettable smile and face. After getting to know each other better, it didn't take long to realize that she was the most kind, selfless, captivating, and outgoing personality I had ever come across, without a superficial bone in her body. The kind of person who would talk to anybody while taking a genuine interest in listening to them. I had never met anyone quite like her. And as the months of working together turned into a year of becoming close friends, I could no longer deny the fact that I had fallen completely in love with her, to the point where withholding my true feelings was slowly killing me. And believe me when I say that opposites attract, because while our chemistry together was undeniable, we were also very different people and personalities, with the commonality being that we both came from broken homes with fathers who left. So fast forward through the years of moving around for work and the up and downs most long-term relationships endure, and we would also have 2 kids together, one of which having special needs. So I ended up becoming a stay-at-home parent, and with everything we had been through over the years, we would learn to love and appreciate each other even more. For me, it was her internal drive and genuine spirit that I could never match. And for her, it was watching me become the doting father who took on the challenging and less glamorous role of taking care of our children. So 17 years after first meeting and working together with our 2 kids alongside us to witness the momentous occasion, we finally got married in 2009. And while it was truly one of the happiest days of my life, there was a part of me that still struggled with my own identity. I mean, I knew my wife and kids loved me as I loved them, but it seems I never quite figured out how to fully love or accept myself, always lacking an inner peace and acceptance for who I was or hadn't become in life. So that's a brief rundown of my life before my awakening. And I thank you for bearing with me, because now I can get into the more recent paranormal, coincidental, and unexplainable things that tie it together. In 2010, a year after getting married, my family and I would move into a new neighborhood, and I soon would take a job doing contract work from home. It was also around this time, through the wonders of YouTube, that I found myself stumbling across new information on certain taboo subjects, starting with JFK's assassination. Ever since the early 1990s, I had always found it an intriguing story, not only aided by Oliver Stone's movie, but also through a 5-part special I had seen on A&E called The Men Who Killed Kennedy, both of which led me to believe, even back then, that there was more to the truth than we were being told. From there, I found myself getting lured into a wide array of other topics on YouTube, such as RFK's assassination, the Skull and Bones Group, Bohemian Grove, the Illuminati, 9/11, and eventually, the biggest conspiracy subject of all, UFOs and whether or not we're alone in the universe. After about a year of bouncing around YouTube, in the fall of 2011, I came across the audiobook Bringers of the Dawn by Barbara Marciniak. And after I started listening to it, it was as if clarity kicked in, because so much of what I was hearing resonated deeply within me. And then, in early 2012, strange things started happening. I recently began listening to a Silva meditation app for several consecutive days, until one afternoon, while listening to it in bed with earbuds, I had a sudden and powerful feeling emitting from my chest, like waves of energy bouncing off my body, leaving me completely immobile for several minutes while writing out the bizarre sensation I had never felt before. Not long after that, I had watched a video about Kundalini energy, claiming its effects would trigger it within you. And sure enough, I would go on to feel an intense experience slowly creep halfway up my body, once again, something I had never felt before. Soon after, unexplainable things started to occur in my life. It began with tapping on my shoulder when nobody else was in the room. At first, I tried to convince myself it was only muscle spasms, until apparently I needed more convincing, because one night it turned into a full-on squeeze of my arm, just like a thumb on one side and fingers on the other. And like the taps on the shoulder, there would also soon be taps and knocks in the room, usually timed perfectly to coincide with a metaphysical thought I would just have, as to confirm the validity of me being on the right track. or another way of communicating with me, you could say. At this point, the reality I thought I once knew had been thoroughly thrown into question. However, I could barely tell my wife what I was going through, let alone talk to anyone else about it. Then for several consecutive nights, I would end up waking at 3 a.m., completely drenched in sweat, with the final night leaving me shaking so severely in the bathroom, I could barely control my body, and I thought I might be having a nervous breakdown. Soon after, I would start frequenting a nearby used bookstore to seek information on what might be happening to me. And one day while on my way there, I asked the mysterious universe I now found myself living in if it could help me find a book to give me some answers. But instead of looking for a book in their large metaphysical section, I walked up the aisle and blindly ran my fingers across a row of books until I stopped on one and opened my eyes to a book called The Stormy Search for the Self by Christina and Stanislav Grof, a book that discusses what a spiritual emergency is. And their book would not only confirm that I wasn't going crazy, but it would also prove to me that the universe can be quite literal in responding to a request. So with everything that had happened and was continuing to happen, I still didn't particularly feel like talking about what I was going through, let alone be around people. But through the internet, I was able to at least find others who had shared their stories, which did bring some comfort and hope. Eventually, I bought a talisman, a type of pendant said to absorb negative energies. I took it home and went into my wife's bead box to make my own leather band and firmly crimped on my own clasp for it, the kind with the thumb lever that slips over a hole attached to the other end. And except for in the shower, I wore it constantly. About 3 months later, my family got invited for a picnic at a large municipal park, and it was during the drive there that I remember reading something that said that after 100 days, you should get rid of the talisman by either casting it into the ocean or burying it in the ground. And realizing it had been around 100 days that I'd been wearing it, I figured burying it at that park we were heading might be a good place to get rid of it. However, by the time we got there, after hiking into the woods where we would prepare to eat lunch, I had totally forgotten about the talisman. Yet towards the end of our meal, I felt something hit my lap. And when I looked down, there was the talisman. I picked it up to notice that nothing had broken off and the leather strap and thumb clasp were still intact, yet somehow it came undone. I didn't say anything to the others who were still talking and eating, but I got up from the table to walk along a trail and bury it in the ground, realizing that I wasn't the only one who thought it was the right time and place for me to get rid of it. Then in October of 2012, a certain story came to my attention that began making me reflect on my past. A girl named Audrey Potts had recently killed herself after being raped and filmed by 3 teenage boys. And when I saw her picture, she reminded me a little bit of my old friend PJ from the hospital. And while this revelation was happening, the devastating Hurricane Sandy would soon slam the East Coast, where we had friends and family to be concerned over. And yet a couple of weeks later, we would have a small fire in between our house and our neighbors. And with the exception of a small portion on the side of our garage, there wasn't much structural damage. But we still had to pull everything out of our garage and store it under tarps out back, including some old boxes that we hadn't opened in years, which we kept restoring throughout our travels, but would soon yield another clue. In the meantime, my wife and I went down to the local fire department's administration office to file a report. And through the glass windows that overlooked many people sitting at their desks, the woman in charge of new paperwork walks over, sees our address and says, "Oh my God, I used to live on that street when I was a kid." So I asked her, "Was it the third house up from the park?" And she slowly cracked a big smile and said, "Yes." Now, I don't know what the odds are of having a fire lead us to somebody who used to live in our house, but in a town of over 80,000 people, the odds must be fairly high. Regardless, a part of me had been spooked by the fire, mainly because of all the occurrences which happened throughout 2012 that had already gotten my attention. So I wasn't sure what to think. I mean, if things happen for a reason, as I'd been learning through other people sharing their stories, then how did the fire fit into the equation? Well, I would soon find out, but not before a couple of more reminders of my past that came into play for good measure. In early 2013, I started carpooling my daughter and another girl from our neighborhood to the local high school. And through her mother, and with her mother, my wife and I would soon learn this other girl had been cutting herself with a razor. One day, after not showing up for her ride from me after school, her mother insisted on bringing her over that weekend to apologize to me in person. So with her mother, my wife and I all sitting around the couch, after she apologized out of the blue with no warning to me, my wife says to this girl that I might be a good person for her to talk to, since I had a troubled past and knew other girls who did as well. Glancing wide-eyed at my wife for a second, I found myself suddenly fumbling out words about having been in a psychiatric hospital as a teen with girls who had hurt themselves. And in hearing myself say it out loud, something I otherwise never spoke of, I suddenly became overrun with emotions to the point where I had to stand up and regain my composure. And it was at that moment when I realized there were things from my past that still haunted me, and I needed to address them. And then, conveniently enough, through the wonders of the reality I now found myself living in, the movie Girl Interrupted kept coming into my attention. And when I considered all the strange synchronistic coincidences that I had already experienced, I could only assume the universe really wanted me to watch this movie about a teenage girl who was put in a psychiatric hospital. So I watched the film, and I immediately started having memories and flashbacks of my experience in one as a teen. The medication window, the pill cups, the lounge, the conversations, all while observing others around me. And just like one of the girls on my ward, one of the main characters in the movie was also named Lisa, who was the outspoken ringleader as well. Then, near the end of the film, there was a dramatic revealing of one of the characters that was not far removed from the reason my friend PJ had wanted to kill herself. And once the movie was over, I was left feeling very raw and reflective on a period of my life I now realized I wasn't capable of fully processing as a teen. A day or two after the movie ended, I decided to look up and track down my old friend PJ. And after what was then 30 years from when we met at the hospital. And when I did, needless to say, I blew her mind. She would eventually go on to tell me how her home got destroyed by Hurricane Sandy the previous October, which is only a few weeks before I was going through my own ordeal with the fire we had, and how she was currently living in a friend's basement, having salvaged a few belongings she had with her. That's when I mentioned how I had found some books in boxes after our fire, which I hadn't taken out in years. Now, I didn't tell her the book I currently had on my bedside table, but when she told me the book she had on her bedside table was titled Notes to Myself by Hugh Prather, I was left stunned once again, for that was the same book I found in one of those old boxes that I currently had on my bedside table. Now, regardless of the many coincidences I had already experienced, this one was the real game changer for me, especially when I knew I wouldn't have had that book by my bedside table if not for the fire, with the same being true for PJ and Hurricane Sandy. And then, the more I explained to her the details of my awakening and what had led me to reach out to her, Audrey Potts, our neighbor's daughter, in the movie Girl Interrupted, it only added to an already difficult period of her life by kicking her door down, as she once put it, and triggering a part of her awakening. As she too now realized and understood our bizarre yet destined connection in this particular lifetime. So between the woman at the fire administration office who happened to have lived in our house as a young girl, and then PJ having the same book on her bedside table as I, a third aha moment would soon make me question not only the fire, but so many other things that occurred in my life and the subsequent reasons behind them. Shortly after reconnecting with PJ, that's when I first started hearing about and then noticing the 11/11 phenomena, until one day it dawned on me to look back at the calendar for the date of the fire. And sure enough, it was on Sunday, November 11th. Now, there's just a few more key incidents that I feel I need to mention, which are my sightings and a revelation from about my mysterious father. Um, did you want to ask me anything before I go into all this?
Oh, no, you're doing great. It's
All
really
right.
interesting.
Okay. So, in the late spring of 2013, I was upstairs by myself on my computer and I started feeling really tired. So I decided to lay out on a couch we have up there, something I usually never did. And yet I quickly dozed off. It couldn't have been for more than an hour when I was awoken by the sound of static buzzing in my ears, the kind you might hear on an old tube television with no reception. It grew faintly louder until I picked up my head and happened to look at the windows directly across from me to see two large almond-shaped eyes looking in at me from outside. Now, because it was dark outside, they were only visible because within those eyes was the same snowy static you might see on a TV channel with no reception, which matched the familiar sound I was still hearing in my ears. And yet, as I slowly propped my head up further, knowing full well I wasn't dreaming or imagining what was occurring, the eyes slowly drifted down below the window and out of sight, with the static noise leaving my ears in unison along with them. The whole experience lasted less than 10 seconds, as if the more consciously awakened I became, the sooner the experience I was having needed to stop. And just for the record, from the outside, those windows are somewhere between 12 and 14 feet above the ground.
Mhm.
My next sighting would take place while on vacation with my wife. And it was not only what I saw, but the timing of it. This is because only weeks before, I had watched Dr. Stephen Greer give an interview talking about going into the desert with a group of like-minded UFO-seeking individuals and making a craft appear in the sky by putting their collective thoughts together in hopes of seeing one. And because I knew my wife and I were going to be staying right on the Pacific Ocean, I mentioned this to her just before we left for our trip, saying, maybe we can see something if we put our minds together. On our second night there, while sitting outside overlooking the dark, vast Pacific Ocean, I looked up into the night sky and noticed a scattered layer of low-set clouds above us, which couldn't have been more than a few thousand feet above our heads. And at that precise moment, a silent, multicolored object flew through the clouds and illuminated them on the way. Given the speed it was moving, what I saw lasted only seconds, but it was undeniable. Silent, quick, multicolored, and directly over our heads. Although my wife had been looking out over the ocean at the time and missed it, I couldn't help but think about the conversation I had with her only a couple of days earlier about maybe seeing a UFO while away on our trip. It's almost as if the sighting above us was a tailor-made occurrence, not unlike how I thought about ridding myself of the talisman in the woods, and then it mysteriously falling into my lap not long after we arrived there.
Mm.
Now, the final visual phenomena I need to mention will lead into a brief story about my father. And from there, we can wrap things up with any questions or comments on your end. So this one happened one night while I was sitting up in bed on my laptop. It was the early evening and I was writing. And as it grew darker over the next couple of hours, eventually the only light sources in the room were from my laptop and a stream of light coming through the cracked bedroom door from the hallway. A little while later, I closed my laptop and I lay there to rest my eyes for a few minutes in the mostly dark room, when moments later, a couple of small, hazy light orbs appeared directly in front of my face before disappearing. And then, in the corner of the room, appeared a slightly larger yellow light, whose edges were crisper and more defined, looking more like a colored lens that was tilted down on its side. While I lay there motionless, staring at it, it slowly started floating towards me to a mere 1.5 feet or so away from my face. It was about the size of a quarter, and while quite relaxed yet in awe, I didn't move a muscle. It stayed there next to me for approximately 10 seconds before finally whizzing away towards the corner where it originally emanated from, while simultaneously decreasing in size before disappearing entirely. Moments after it had disappeared, that's when the date quickly occurred to me. It was my father's birthday, who had passed away less than a year earlier in the summer of 2017. Now, about my father, the man who gave me one last puzzle piece to think about for the rest of my days. Because he left when I was a young teen, throughout the years, I would see him less and less, from every couple of months to maybe a few times a year to every few years, until the last time in the summer of 2015. And by then, his slow physical state became very concerning for me, as if I couldn't help but sense that the end was near for him. Fortunately, ever since my 2012 awakening, I had been communicating with him more via email, more than our standard "how have you been" phone conversations we'd have a couple of times a year. But my father was a very private guy, brilliantly smart, funny, but generally kept his personal thoughts and feelings to himself. And yet the few things he ever told me about his work as an engineer was whenever he left the country, he had to tell the government. And at his retirement party, he mentioned to me that the Navy came to present him with a plaque and dubbed him a giant in his field of work. So throughout my emails with him, I would often try to gauge his own belief system, throwing various topics at him like conspiracy theories, thoughts on metaphysics, our bizarre, unexplainable moon, and even UFOs and whether or not we have been visited by other beings in the universe. Yet he always seemed to deny believing in any of that stuff. However, less than a year before he died, out of the blue in an email one day, he confessed to me to having been to Area 51. Now, I don't doubt that had I thought of asking him a couple of years earlier, he probably would have said he didn't believe there was such a place. But regardless, whatever he knew and whatever he was doing there became a secret he took with him, because he never told me anything else. And just like so many other things with my awakening that became beyond explainable, his confession of having been to one of the most secretive and mysterious places somehow seemed fitting. So, what does it all mean, Karen? I can't be for certain, but I have my theories and opinions. Yet I do know that everybody has their own unique experience during an awakening process. And I just want to thank you for allowing me to share mine on your show.
Oh, my pleasure, Tom. It's very interesting. And I get quite a few letters and comments and emails. I shouldn't say letters, emails from people who have had similar experiences. I've had some similar experiences. And for a while, we think we're the only ones. And then when we start to find each other, we find out this is not anything odd or rare or anything like that. I'm wondering, Tom, can you share with us if there was one moment or anything in particular that occurred that made you want to build your website?
Well, there's probably a culmination of things. Originally, I had started writing a book, which goes into great detail about the hospital, my time in boarding school, and the rest of my life leading up to my awakening in 2012. But I guess you could say I felt there was time was of the essence, and I realized I could reach people a lot faster if I built a website, to share my story and the people and subjects I came across, for those who could use the information. Because, I just really wanted to help people, because what I went through in the early stages was really tough. I mean, you think you're losing your mind.
Yep.
You just can't, you don't feel like talking to other people about it. And yet without the people that I had found on the internet, I doubt I would be sharing my story at all. So in a way, I guess you could say I was like paying it forward and taking everything that I had learned and the people I discovered and just kind of slapping it into one whole website that I figured, the people who were, destined to find it would find it and hopefully help them in some way.
I was really impressed with your website. I went on there and I thought, oh my God, this is the perfect first stop for anybody who has had synchronicities, or perhaps they're frequently looking at the clock and it's 11:11, or they're getting some kind of experiences that are not commonly talked about. So I just love your website. It's very easy to navigate. It starts off with your story, which is very interesting, and I bet you so many people could relate to it. And then you get into, the different rabbit holes or different, directions you can take with research to find out more about, our common experiences. You have an extensive resource page that gives you just so many leads to where to go to find out more. It's just a fantastic website. Now, Tom, do you charge anything for offering that service, or is it completely free?
Not at all. I just wanted to help people. Where it goes from here, the universe will let me know in its own way.
Yeah, it sure will.
And yet I just want to also say the coincidences, they still occur in my life. And most recently, you had a guest, Susan, on your show a couple weeks ago, and the name of her website was called Rise and Shine, and that happened to be the name of my awakening story that I put on my website. So once I heard that, I was like, "Yep, here we go."
Here we go. Yeah, yeah. And just to remind everyone that the links, to your website and also email will be in the description box below, so they will have no problem finding you. Now, I'm wondering if we could move on a little bit to, I'm wondering, what did you learn about yourself through your awakening process?
Well, for starters, I realized I had a lot of anger and resentment, towards the world that, I'd held on to from a young age. And it wasn't just about my past, but also from the many other hurting souls that I had met along the way, and I had to make peace with myself, and I had to accept what I went through and see, that my life is ultimately a gift. It's like a unique learning experience. And even though it's filled with highs and lows, and things can be difficult, I also realize there's more going on behind the scenes and reasons for things happening the way they do than, I had previously realized.
So it kind of, could you say that it led you to having a faith, being able to have faith in something outside of yourself as well as within?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I am, still in touch with PJ, and, there's a part of me, another reason with the website is like, I mentioned the girls' names I was there with because, I keep thinking if things happen synchronistically, then maybe one of those girls, I was with on my ward 37 years ago, might stumble across my website, might be guided to it in their own special way, and they could reach out and get a hold of me, and it would probably blow my mind because I'd love to talk to them.
No, I hope that happens.
Yeah.
I in my personal journey, I find very similar to you that at the core of my awakening and ascension process is self-reflection, self-refinement, seeing myself more objectively, working on my character defects. It's indeed not only a lot of work, but it takes tremendous courage, which I think is why some people shy away from it. But would you say the results are well worth the effort?
Oh yeah. I mean, you could tell already. Although I'd made the website, it's another thing to come on somebody's show and start talking about it. And there's so much there. I had to have my notes and write it all down because I just was afraid I was going to forget something. I mean, I had to kind of piece this whole thing together and present it in a certain way. And yet, I do feel relieved that, I kind of got through it. And yet, ultimately, I hope I come across that my heart's in the right place, because I know there's other people out there who are going through this and starting to realize things and question things.
Mm-hmm.
And, we're all in this together,
We-
doesn't matter, what your faith is, your political background, I think this is beyond any of that,
Oh, I agree. I agree wholeheartedly. So I wonder if you could tell us a little bit more about the Decade of Awakening, what that means on a global scale. Can you tell us more about that?
Um, I mean, I just think it's the need to transform the consciousness of the people on this planet, yeah, I think there's those who are trying to stop the spiritual development that is happening, and this is either through the media manipulation, chemical induction, or other technologies for that matter.
Mm-hmm.
And it's all aimed to distract us from discovering our true divine nature.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think change is occurring, and if my story is any indication, help is occurring through experiences that people are having. Um, and I think it's from, beings and entities that are in direct contact with us,
Mm-hmm.
but how long the whole process will take, I wish that's the $1,000,000 question, I don't know.
Mm-hmm. And where do you see this heading? Where do you see us? Um, um, where do you see us heading? And over this next decade.
Well, I mean, there's going to be a lot of upheaval, as if there isn't already, in
Mm-hmm.
this year that has been 2020.
Mm-hmm.
But we all have to just stick together regardless of what we believe, because there's something greater happening. And we're never going to get through the decade if we just keep being at each other's throats and fighting and warring and
Mm-hmm.
and I don't know. I mean, I pray usually every night unless I pass out from exhaustion.
Mm-hmm.
But like I said, it's happening. There's a buzz in the air. You can kind of even though there's a lot of strife and chaos, it seems, people are waking up,
Mm-hmm.
and I can only trust the process, that's all I can say. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. So I'm wondering if there's something that you would like to say to other people who are going through difficult times, especially if they suspect they're having an awakening, if they're starting to notice the synchronicities, if they're starting to be more perceptive. What do you have to say to those kind of people?
Um, well, with so many of the lives being lost and people being uprooted, with the fires and the hurricanes, and of course the pandemic, there's no question that people are being forced into a lot of self-reflection,
Mm-hmm.
and it just seems that pieces of the truth are slowly being spoon-fed to us, through whistleblowers and experiencers speaking out
Mm-hmm.
in great detail about what they know.
Mm-hmm.
And no matter how difficult, a person's reality has become, I you got to just keep believing, because amazing things can happen. I mean, I can just give you a brief example just off the top of my head.
Mm-hmm.
My brother-in-law back east had just recently lost his job, as so many other companies are just downsizing and going
Mm-hmm.
under and everything else. And, without saying much, I'm sure he was pretty devastated by it. And I told him, don't worry, things happen for a reason, just keep believing. And then like a week later, he got a new job, making more money, working from home so he can be, with his wife and kids. And, I think he's probably happier than he was commuting, into the
Mhm.
city at that point. So it's just like
Mhm.
the mysterious things happen and things work out for a reason, and just hang in there and keep believing,
Mhm.
that's what I would have to say.
Mhm. Good advice. Good advice. I would add to that too that it's like we're afloat on stormy seas. Hang on to that life preserver, whatever that might mean to you. And I'm really hoping folks go and check out your website, because as far as I'm concerned, that's a life preserver. That's something that people can hang on to, and they can go there for information. They can go on there for advice. They can go on there for so many things. I'm wondering, Tom, if people want to reach out to you, do you want to just mention, even though it'll be in the description box, do you want to just mention how people can get a hold of you?
Yes, my email address is tom@withinsideout.com.
Mm-hmm.
And, if you have any questions or comments or suggestions or whatever it is, I am there to answer. And I will be adding things to my website as I go along. And I
Mm-hmm.
also just want to say that, I love both of your shows, the Quantum Guides series and the Forbidden Transformation. I've been like blown away by, some of the stuff you and Chris have been talking about and some of your other guests, and it's all very enriching and just, continues to spark more questions. And it's all good.
Oh, thank you, Tom. Yeah, Chris and I put a lot of effort into the Forbidden Transformation, because we want people, those that want to make their own contact, whether it be with ET or their guides or their higher self. There's so many ways of doing it, and there's actually as many ways of doing it as there are people who wish to do it in the first place. It's a pretty exciting process. And then, of course, the Quantum Guide Show is to allow people to hear the experiences and stories of other people that have woke up. And now, when we first wake up, we're in a bit of shock and awe for a while. Then
Mhm.
once we find our orientation, we go on and we bring our gifts to the world. How wonderful is that? What better work could we be doing? And so you're doing that kind of work, Tom. I'm doing that kind of work. There's thousands of us doing this kind of work, but we kind of need to take our attention away from the doom and gloom and the impossibility and shift that over to what is actually possible and what is encouraging. And there's so much to be grateful for. And I got to tell you, Tom, I'm really grateful to have you on the show. I'm thrilled to bits. I'm pretty sure everybody's going to really like to hear what you have to say. And, keep in contact. As things progress for you, let me know, if you want to come on the show again and share where you're headed or what's happened since, or any amazing experiences that you've had with people who perhaps contact you because they're going through some similar situations. That would be wonderful too. And just wondering if there's anything last minute thing you want to add before we say goodbye.
Well, just, thank you. Thank you for what you do. Thank you for having me on your show and giving me the opportunity. And, just keep up the good work. And, I'll definitely be in touch. And I look forward to more episodes. And I appreciate everything you do. So
Well,
thank you, Karen.
Well, thank you, Tom. I also feel the same way about you and about what you're bringing to the world, and I appreciate you very much. So
Okay.
we'll say goodbye until the next time, and I hope you have a lovely day, and I'm just thrilled to bits that you came on the show. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Take care, Karen.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us for the Quantum Guide Show. Become the change you wish to see in the world. Subscribe to Karen's YouTube channel, click the like button, and share this show with your friends. Check out Karen's website at KarenHoltonHealthCoach.com. All the links are available in the description box below. Until the next time, keep up the good work.
Surrendering to endlessness puts all my inner strife to rest. For time gives birth to hurriedness. It all makes sense, well, more or less. And the sages put me to their test. With heart and soul, I do my best to find the answers to my quest. I wonder and I must confess, I don't know where it comes from, but I know it's okay. If this is all an illusion, then I'm willing to play, 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 play. It's okay. It's okay.